Lemnisk videocast, where we speak with global thought leaders in business, tech, digital transformation, martech, data, and all of the before. So I'm Shalaka Desai. I am client partner here in the customer success org at Lemnisk. Today's topic is digital transformation strategies for marketers in 2020. First off, it's really my pleasure to introduce Namrita Mahindro. She is Chief Digital Officer at Aditya Birla Group. Namrita possesses over 2 decades of industry experience driving growth and innovation strategies. As a digital transformation specialist, she led award-winning CX transformations for Taj Hotels, Club Mahindra, Mahindra Auto, amongst others. She's a tech evangelist, a digital expert, but leads with design thinking and advocacy of an innovation of culture among organizations. Namrita has won several awards over the years, and amongst others, she is a 2-time recipient of the IDC Digital Transformer Award. So welcome, Namrita. It's really a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Shalaka. Thank you for that introduction.
Yeah. So our second speaker is our homegrown, CEO of Lemnisk, Subra Krishnan. He is a leader of martech and product strategy at Lemnisk, which is a customer data platform company with real-time marketing automation capabilities. So hi and welcome again, Subra. As always, great to have you.
And Namrita, once again, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Likewise, thanks, Subra, for inviting me over here and for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts.
So first off, diving straight in, the topic for today. So Namrita, what we'll do is we'll start from the broader, details and then dive slowly into things one by one. So first off, I wanted to ask you, while you've led digital transformation at so many companies, some of which I even named in the introductions, what is, your first step of assessment? So how do you sort of go ahead and assess the digital maturity of an organization? How do you start with the why and what is something you would like to know?
Sure, Shalaka. So when I started my journey in digital transformation about 7 or 8 years back, I think George Westerman was the leading light or the leading authority on the subject globally. And when he looked at, measuring digital maturity, there were really 2 levers that he was talking about. One was around digital capability, and the other one was around digital leadership of an organization. Of course, over the years, many more digital maturity models have emerged, but I think this is still one that I go back to and it holds largely true. The only other addition I would add to this model is around the digital impact. So when we talk about digital leadership, what it means to me is really understanding what kind of a vision the organization has or the leadership team of that organization has. It's also how do they look at business strategy and digital strategy. Is there a strategic alignment between the two, or where the digital strategy is seen as an enabler of the business strategy, or is it that they're running as 2 parallel strategies, or it's envisaged as 2 parallel strategies? The purpose in terms of looking at what can digital strategy actually provide? Is it around strengthening the competitive advantage of the organization, or is it a little bit more tactical in nature? So that's the first sort of lens that one would look at, and some of the things that one would evaluate under the digital leadership canvas. When you talk about digital capability, this on the other hand is really about the operational acceleration that can be provided to an organization by adopting digitization as well as digital. So typically it focuses more around what kind of business efficiencies and effectiveness can be driven, how much of the process transformation and technology toolkit is already in their arsenal, what is the data maturity of the organization, the capabilities and the competencies of the workforce, are some of the things that you would typically look under the digital capability umbrella. And I'll elaborate a little bit more on this as we move forward. And then the digital impact, as I said, is, to me, is about really 3 things. First, it's what is the culture of the organization? Because, at the end of the day, what really differentiates, and now over the last, I guess, 7-8 years, I've had the opportunity to lead digital transformations across half a dozen different companies. And given that, the culture of the organization becomes extremely important in terms of figuring out, do they have a digital DNA? Do they have a couple of leaders at least who are thinking along those lines? Or is it something that is going to have to be built? Invariably, again, I'm saying this because we're almost a decade into the transformation journey. If you'd asked me the same question a decade back, I would have said, it would have been slightly different. You would have not looked at culture because everybody would have been at the starting point. But today you do find, culture is one area to look at. Similarly, I think it's important to understand that, is this an organization which is looking at, just doing digital from a perspective of doing a handful of pilots, looking at it in a very experimental, accidental way, almost in some cases, or is it something that, they have scaled? And I think that is a huge differentiation between a lot of organizations who start, but then for years together remain in the pilot mode and are really challenged when they have to take things to scale. And finally, I guess, it's around the success metrics and KPIs, which are very different for digital transformation from your usual business as usual KPIs. So I'm not saying that those become redundant, but they need to be amplified with a new set of KPIs that you would typically have when you're looking at a transformation journey. And so, have those been considered or have they been taken into account? So with these three levers, really, what you're trying to understand is then what is the potential maturity? And if one was to try and classify that into some kind of a framework, the baseline would be somebody who's doing it, as I said, in an incidental or an accidental manner, so to speak. The next level is where you start, believing that there is a need to do it and you start experimenting. The third level of maturity is really about doing it very purposefully with the intent to do it. And, this is where you will find a lot of organizations today, given that, we've had digital transformation evolve over the years. And finally, of course, the more sort of, advanced organizations or industry sectors per se are in this transformative zone where they've achieved a significant amount of success and it has become a digital enterprise in the true sense, as opposed to, still trying to figure out what the journey would look like.
Got it. That's so. The framework, again, I think this is something that I've seen so often with all of the digital leaders who are very effective in their roles. They always are framework thinkers. And I think the first thing we're seeing here is, Namrita, from you as well, the framework comes out here, which is digital leadership, digital capabilities, and digital impact, right? But you added this third dimension, right? So maybe that's one thing I want to understand, maybe compared to a decade back vis-a-vis now, what made you add that? Like, why did you bring that into the picture?
Sure. So I think the reason for bringing in the digital impact was really, goes back to understanding there are a lot of digital transformations which have happened over the last decade plus now. But what we find by stats is that over 70% of them have been failures. So really, when you have to start thinking about at least planning to, eventually failure and success is something that you can plan for. And you can, look at seeing how can you get in the success enablers for ensuring that the transformation journey that you're going to embark on is pivoting more towards success than not. And so with that intent, I think, I brought in the third element, which focused on some of these areas. Now, when you start looking at the success enablers again, I think if I was to get into a little bit of detail over there, when you start a conversation with any organization, it's really about understanding what is the purpose of doing, the transformation in the first place. Why are they embarking on this journey? And I think over the many years, I've found that we've had to go back and recraft the problem statement, what we're trying to solve for. Because oftentimes it's not either big enough or it is not appropriate and worthy of being, addressed as a transformation project. So I think that becomes sort of the starting point. And therefore, if your purpose is not clear, then the transformation will not happen. And therefore, you have to look at it from an impact point of view. Is this something which is incremental or transformative? The second aspect is really that once you've got that, what is the vision that organizations are looking for? Because there is a lot of work that is happening with the more advanced industries. And so when you're starting to articulate that vision, is that something that the CEO has as a standalone vision? Is there a buy-in which comes in basis whatever the criteria may be? And do you have a couple of, as I said earlier, a couple of digital savvy leaders in the mix who can actually help you become champions or advocates and take that journey once you embark on it forward? So I think from an impact point of view, again, if I was to go back to that, having the clarity on the purpose and the vision, I think, become extremely important. uh, and again, delving deeper, I do have about 8, 10 to 12 different factors which I consider as the success enablers. So if I was to maybe touch upon maybe 2 or 3 more, I'll continue with the leadership team. And I think one of the huge differences I see is there are organizations which start on the transformation journey, but the leadership commitment is something which is limited to the initial thrust or the initial push. And again, in my erstwhile organizations, I've been extremely fortunate where in some of them, we've gone on to say, unless the CEO is not the sponsor, not even the CXO, but the CEO himself or the MD himself has to, or herself has to be the sponsor. And only then are we embarking on this. So that commitment that, it is something that is going to be driven by them becomes extremely important. And that's when you start measuring impact, you're talking about a different scale. When you're taking it to the board, when you're taking it to the CEO, the size and the opportunity of the transformation really becomes meaningful, comes to life. And I guess I'll touch upon one more over here, since I've touched upon culture and some of the other factors earlier. In terms of resource allocation, this is not something like any change management program. And this is more complex and more time consuming than a normal change management program. So I think from a resource allocation point of view, having dedicated teams and budgets, because a lot of times organizations say, let's take it out of the existing operational budgets, or let the existing teams who are working on it continue with it. So I think that bit has to come out as a standalone, and over a period of time, it can go back into the mainstream business. But it's really about almost keeping a twin engine of business as usual and then your transformation initiatives. And once your transformation journey is mature enough, then that becomes your way of doing business as usual. But till then, keeping that separation and the willingness. So when you ask these questions up front, in terms of saying, are you willing to go down these paths, make these commitments, and actually live them, is where you start looking at, what would potentially pivot towards more of a successful journey than not.
Got it. And it's interesting that you've done this across a very very sort of, I would say, diverse spectrum of industries now, right? So I know you've done it for travel and hospitality. You've done it for slightly more brick and mortar kind of businesses. So when you spoke of these parameters and trying to assess how big an initiative this is or how small an initiative this is and what's the potential here, does it really vary by industry? Have you seen any of that happening, or is it some of these parameters are sort of rock solid in terms of being consistent across industries and domains?
So I think a lot of factors, Subra, are actually fairly fundamental to this journey. Having said that, I think what we typically find is that the levels of maturity can definitely vary between industries, be it from a cultural point of view, from a systems point of view, a process or capabilities point of view. If I was to make a very basic distinction between consumer-facing businesses, as you said, or manufacturing businesses, the former are definitely ahead of the curve. Yeah. Then again, you can take in, even within, let us say, manufacturing, you will have, let us say, the automotive industry, which has been on this, transformation path for the last 5 to 7 years, versus the chemical industry, which I'm now part of, which has been more recent in its adoption of looking at transformation over the last 2-3 years. If I look at it from a lens of, let us say, the business model point of view, The travel and hospitality industry was disrupted um, with the advent of Airbnb in 2008. Um, Tesla came into existence in 2003, but the first car got rolled out again in 2008. And it was only a couple of years later that we felt the impact of both these industries getting disrupted. But if I look at it from a chemical industry point of view, again, the opportunity to build new platform businesses has been fairly limited and in only certain pockets. So for example, if I look at within the chemical space, we deal in everything from chemicals, specialty chemicals, fertilizers, insulators, textiles. So there's a fairly wide range that we're talking about. So if you look at it, let us say from a fertilizer business point of view, over there, one of the opportunities that we have, identified, which I've done even in my previous life, is around creating a farmer's platform. Now, this is, where you would provide an advisory service, where you would look at, providing certain products and services over there. Now, this is fairly nascent still for even the farming industry. Again, if you look at it from a point of view of, the priorities against different industries, you would find that for the travel and hospitality industry, when we started the digital transformation journey in 2013 for Taj, it started with reimagining the customer experience. Yeah. Whereas in the chemical industry, over the last 6-8 months that I've been over here, the focus has really been on embracing smart manufacturing, industry 4.0, so a lot more of an operational focus as opposed to, and that is a priority as opposed to the CX side of it. Again, data and analytics plays an extremely important role across all of these industries, but the use of data and analytics in a consumer-facing industry, for example, could be more around the customers and the data around them versus in, the industrial sector, it's really around the machine data, sometimes even more than the customer data, because your customers run into a couple of hundreds as opposed to the consumer industry where they run into millions and tens of millions. So these are just different pivots that you would have, looking at different facets of the business, which are somewhat different across industries, but that would sort of give you a sense of, I can go on, but there's, the technology framework or the capabilities, but this is really the lens from which one could look at different industries. But the fundamentals pretty much remain the same.
Got it. Got it.
And one other thing, in this context would be, so how do you then sort of balance out from a C-suite, perspective, more longer term kind of disruptive transformations versus more incremental and more quick revenue kind of wins, right? How do you sort of take calls on those?
So Shalaka, it's really about, creating a balance between the two in your transformation journey. I don't think transformation is really about just the long-term wins that you have. I think it's extremely important because you will always have a set of skeptics, even today in the room. Of course, COVID has helped, change some of the perceptions for good. But having said that, I think you have to still look at a fair balance between the two, because there's enough and more for one to do in terms of showing evidence of the value creation potential with the transformation journey that one is embarking on. And it's these quick wins, the revenue-oriented wins that you talked about, which actually help keep the momentum going, quarter on quarter as you go back and, you report into how you're progressing with the different milestones that you have. So I think they play a very important role in what they do in terms of the motivational factor, in terms of showing proof of the fact that, it's not just about a return that you're going to get in 3 or 4 years. And it also gives you then the breathing space to actually put in the time and effort that you require on some of the longer, initiatives which will have a larger gestation period. So again, going back to, if you were to look at, a new business model, that is not going to happen in 3 months or 6 months. It's going to require large capex investments, and you're going to start seeing returns over a matter of years, not months or even a year's time. Versus on the other hand, if I have something which is, let us say, like creating a new channel of customer engagement, or driving operational excellence, leveraging analytics. These can create a lot of value for the business in the here and now, and they then form the bedrock for greater transformation that you want to do as you move forward.
Yeah. I've also seen this, go hand in hand, Shalak. I would say that as well, which is like in any, I think it comes down to planning. My sense is that in any of these kind of transformation implementations, if you look at it like a jigsaw puzzle that you're trying to put together, I think if you have an in-depth understanding of all of the pieces before you jump in, you can always piece together some of these things faster and make sense and produce a disproportionate kind of value, right? So yeah, I think eventually it comes down to prioritizing these the right way, I would say. Namrita, you brought up this point of COVID, and I know this is probably you probably discussed this ad nauseum with so many people, but I do want to bring up that thread and make sure we understand, how is COVID in the context of the segment or the domain that you are in currently, which is chemicals. So can you just talk a little bit about what that has meant? And, fundamentally for many industries, it's completely altered so many notions of how to run business, maybe even unit economics at some level, right? So how's it been for you, and what have been some of the learnings coming out of the pandemic?
Sure. So, Subra, I think there are two sides to it. I think the one thing which has happened, which has been completely, I guess one of the biggest positives that we've had is that the transformation which has happened or has started in terms of people's mindsets has happened at a global scale, which was never possible, had it been left to a non-COVID situation. Whether we're talking about organizations or whether we're talking about, societies or nations, I think the level of transformation that has happened in terms of people's mindsets is phenomenal. Now, what that obviously does is, till before COVID, for a large part of the brick and mortar companies, and some of those who have not taken to digital transformation, as aggressively as some of the other industries, it was still a little bit of a top-down. I think the biggest change that I've seen is the pull factor has come in. And I think that is not just for my organization or for my sector, but speaking to a lot of other peers across different industries, I think that's the general sentiment. So I think that's one huge change which has happened. Now, given that the pull has, that shift from push to pull has happened, is the first step. The second step, obviously, is COVID has impacted everybody's top lines and bottom lines, in a manner which is unparalleled in some senses. So given that, I think it's a function of figuring out how do we make sure that even if we don't have the immediate budgets for a lot of organizations who did not have it, how do you plan for it and keep that mental sort of momentum going as you move forward? A lot of organizations have actually said, even though we will cut out budgets on certain areas, but I think the need for the visibility, the need for the ability to make faster decisions for doing scenario planning at a different scale, is absolutely become imperative. Like you said, it's changed the unit economics, become a function of people are not meeting each other. There were industries which were very, people centric, wherein you were looking and meeting it with people, and that is the only way known for those industries to operate. And now 6 months into this journey, they've successfully done so without having any physical interaction, but just, virtually connecting. So I think that then again questions, are there opportunities, for creating new platforms? Are there opportunities for interacting differently? And so I think that conversation is opening up in a big way. How do you service your customers? How do you look at new channels that may not have been adopted previously? We had done some dabbling with e-commerce last year for the chemical industry, but I think, again, looking at it very differently, today as compared to 12 months back. So I think there are new opportunities which are opening up. And so I would say, sum total, I think it's been a very big boost for the transformation of organizations. And the winners clearly in this COVID scenario have been all those who had already done the migration. So I think if we have to look at COVID or COVID-like scenarios, because I think the world that we're living in and the future is extremely fragile, and we are going to see an increasing occurrence of things that take us by surprise. So in that context, the more digitally ready we are, the more digitally enabled we are, and that is true for all organizations, the higher the chances of survival. And again, the organizations who have completely done the transformation have actually thrived. And we all know of enough and more examples of those, in the ecosystem. So
yeah, I think that's one very interesting observation that you made, is that we are going to be surprised more often now than in that sense, and maybe one could also argue that a pandemic of this kind was coming, whether you like it or not, right? And so I think in that sense, being prepared ahead of time, and all those who were prepared certainly benefited. So I think from that sense, accelerating these initiatives seems to be the broader trend that we are seeing as well, especially in sectors like, for example, if you take financial services, right? There is a very, very clear demarcation between people during the pandemic, between people who had a lot of these processes digitized in terms of maybe disbursing loans or disbursing other kinds of products, vis-a-vis people who hadn't gone that distance in terms of getting these things in place. Yeah, so totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that difference was very stark. You look at, for example, restaurants and the Zomatos and the Swiggies on the other hand, or you look at any of the digital businesses in terms of digital payments, and the physical payments have almost disappeared any place that you go to. And again, a host of other businesses which have just been very, medicine has gone so hugely digital in the last 6 months. Telemedicine was unthought of in India, as a mass sort of offering before COVID. So so I see lots of changes, and I see a lot of other industries following suit, leveraging some of these opportunities at least.
So Namrita, just going back to one of your previous points, as one of our last few sections of this, video cast, you did also mention data maturity, right? And more from a B2C digital transformation point of view, as both of you rightly mentioned at the start of the pandemic, a lot of organizations who had all these processes already built upon, they benefited largely. So I just want to go back and ask you, what are some factors in terms of data maturity that you look at, in digital transformation? And then what are your sort of recommendations to get the customer data strategy right in place for the right systems to be built on top of it?
So I think what we've seen with digital transformation is really that the disruption has already shaved off significant percentages of revenue and earnings for a lot of organizations. And these can be as large as 30 to 50% in some of the cases that we're talking about. And this is in a scenario where, let us assume that 1 out of 10 organizations have embarked on that journey of digital transformation, even in the consumer facing sectors, so to speak. And so given that, I think this trend is going to grow significantly in the next few years. What customers are expecting, and I'm sure Subra and Shalaka, you would have seen a lot of that yourself, is really connected experiences. They're looking for brands who can talk to them in real time, in a personalized manner, in a contextualized manner. And I think that has become extremely important for an individual to want to interact with the brand. That's almost become a hygiene factor. Now, for an organization to offer that level of personalization and contextualization cannot happen, if they stay with their legacy systems, data systems in place. But even before the systems, it's about the data quality that we are talking about. I think that is, while we talk about a lot of the systems, but transformation after transformation, eventually what matters is the quality of data that you have. How much of it you have, what is the quality of the data that you have. Even though you may have been in business for the last 20 years, very often businesses have some very basic transactional data, or 30 years, they may have some very basic transactional data. So it's really about saying, how can I first make sure that I have enough data, then I have good quality data, and the interactions are not just happening at the point of transaction. There are so many other, formal and informal channels for customers to interact. And again, when I was with Taj, we had started this journey of saying, can we actually have a single data platform where you can not just get the formal, transactional information, but also some of the informal data, whether it was through social chatter or through other mediums, emails, etc., or responses to those, that we could capture and create a single view of the customer. Now, that has remained aspirational over the last 2 decades that I've been in business, and I think it'll continue to remain aspirational. But the point is, one needs to keep striving in that direction. So given that, I think one of the things that we tried to do while I was at Mahindra's was to really look at when somebody walks in to a dealership, and I'm here talking about the automotive business. Oftentimes, our sales executives were, treating it as a fresh lead, or as somebody who's just walked into the dealership. Now, you think about it, the person, and we had research supporting this, saying that people do most of their research and most of their interaction in the online medium. The numbers had dropped from 3 visits in the buying journey to a dealership to just 1 single visit. And that too was predominantly around the test drive experience. So by the time I get to the test drive experience, I have done 70 to 80%. I'm down to my 2-3 cars that I want to pick up. Now, at this point in time, if I'm greeted by somebody and somebody treats me as a new customer or as a new prospect, as opposed to understanding that I may have personalized a brochure for myself online, I may have actually looked at configuring a car in terms of the colors, the accessories, etc. online, and that is saved somewhere on your website. How do you connect those experiences? Or I may walk into the showroom with my family or with my friends and do a collaboration in terms of, actually configuring my car over there. And how are you saving that up? Because I haven't decided to buy, I've done a test drive, I've configured my car. How are you saving all of that up for me so that you have a single view of me as a customer? So I think over here, to cut a long story short, it became imperative for us to start saying, can we connect the dots on all of this? And can we start making sure that we know enough about our customer? We know all about their interactions. Of course, they need to identify themselves while they're doing those interactions online. It's much easier in the hospitality industry because people invariably leave a little bit more of a trail, and they do the buying journey also online. So, you don't have an omni-channel or a multi-channel sort of experience, so to speak. So given that context, we tried to, start working on putting some of that together in terms of identifying and understanding who this customer was, where were they coming from, where were they in the journey. Now, having said that, your question was, what kind of a role, what kind of digital maturity would you look for? We would typically try and understand where is the organization in terms of getting some of these basic building blocks in place. Do they have data? What is the quality of the data? Do they have the technology? Is this technology really relevant, or does it need to be upgraded? Again, if I go back to Mahindra, and we were working on actually looking at a common customer database across the group. And when we look at that, again, you're talking about 100 different businesses. Well, of course, all of them were not on the platform, but you're talking about a fair degree of complexity. So it then becomes again important to understand the purpose of why are you there? What will this data platform allow you to achieve, and how do you need to look at building up the data? Because the way I would build up the data for, let us say, a pharma business, and cross-functionally align it with, let us say, my loan business, or between our auto business and our holidays business, would have been two completely different strategies. And the path of data collection to, the cleaning up, the utilization, the purpose of that would be completely different, as compared to the other one. So given that, I think it becomes extremely important then to make sure that you have the right kind of platforms in place to ensure that you can actually have a single source of truth. It becomes extremely important to ensure that you are looking at it from a perspective of not just the immediate returns, but how is this platform going to impact, or how is your data maturity going to impact the customer lifetime value, as opposed to just saying what is the return on this campaign. And I think that combination of long-term view and a short-term view combined, balanced out, is what one would really need to look at, in terms of looking at the whole data maturity aspect, and looking at it from a perspective of saying, in the transformation journey, what is the role that data is going to play in the short term as well as in the long term. I hope that answers at least a part of your question.
For sure.
In fact, I think you spoke of quality, and you spoke of the number of data sources that are present. Yeah, I think for me, that is the foundational starting point of any digital transformation has to be to gain a control on the data in terms of volume, I would say variety and velocity, right? So I think once you do that, it just makes your decision making as a leader so much more informed, but more importantly, so much more quicker. And I think that is the part that often gets missed out in the process, because when your data isn't right, that the amount of time you lose to really bring all of that together and then get to the heart of the insight, I think in this day and age that time has flown, right? It's the user is gone. So therefore, when you have something like a customer data platform, which allows you to put together a single view of the customer, it allows you to make these kinds of quicker and more informed decisions, and also therefore take the user on a journey which is deliberate as opposed to leaving it to chance. So you can really understand, for example, suboptimal journeys and sort of see if you can nudge users onto more efficient paths, etc. And I think that is where a customer data platform really comes to the rescue. I know there is still some amount of skepticism. I heard part of your complaint as a marketer come through there, saying I've been waiting for something like this for two decades now. But certainly, I think the evolution that has happened in the last 5 years, and you've lived through that as well, certainly makes this one seem very different. And I think, this is the holy grail. So hopefully.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are. I think with the advent of newer technologies, with newer platforms coming into play, I think it is something that every organization needs to look at. Sometimes the question of ROI also comes in, and that's why I brought about the fact that because the next question really is, then I already have a lot of technology stacks. I already have a lot of data platforms. What do I do with all of this legacy stuff? And so I think, again, it's looking at it from a long-term perspective, and not just the next campaign or the next year, so to speak. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers our agenda for today. But lovely speaking with you, Namrita. It's very insightful session. Some great points were covered.
Yeah, thank you, Namrita. Thank you once again. I don't know what we're going to cut here. Certainly seems like this is going to be a very, very useful session for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Subra and Shalaka. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it was a pleasure.